When someone hurts you, how do you overcome the feeling of wanting to take revenge? Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to upgrade and impact our everyday lives. And in this series, Torah for Today, we take a short idea from the Torah portion and use it to uplift our week. Let's talk about revenge. Sometimes someone does something that's so hurtful or so bad or so damaging that a part of you wishes that perhaps maybe you could do something back. And we know that revenge isn't the right way. But how do we overcome those feelings? So I'm going to tell you a story that's going to give us such a clear insight and such a helpful insight into overcoming hurt feelings. In the times of the temple, when all the Jews lived in Israel, there was a concept that was a city that was called the Ori Miklot. What was this Ori Miklot? So the concept was it was like this. If somebody was negligent and killed someone else, right? It was pure negligence. They by mistake killed someone else. What they would have to do is they would have to run and escape to an Ori Miklot. Why? Because the family of the person who was killed was allowed to avenge the murderer's blood as long as they were outside of this city of refuge. But as soon as they were inside the city of refuge, the family could no longer avenge their blood. So it was what it's called, a city of refuge, and they had to stay there and live there until the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, passed away. At which point they were free to leave the city of refuge. They could go home, they could resume life as normal. Now it begs the question, what is the death of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, got to do with anything? Why should that allow this person who killed by mistake why should it change anything for him or his family? So the Abarbanel gives us an incredible insight. He says the Kohen Gadol, think about it, he was the high priest. He was a personality, a huge personality in the Jewish people. And when he passed away, everyone would engage in introspection, and they would realize that life is fleeting. Life passes quickly. And the family of the person who had been killed would also engage in this introspection, and they would realize their own mortality. They would realize that life is short, life is fleeting. And that introspection into the temporary nature of life, that life comes and unfortunately life goes, life is fleeting, would calm down their feelings of wanting to take revenge. And they would no longer want to take the life of the person who had killed their relative by mistake. And they would continue to introspect, and they would realize that after a person passes away, they have to give an accounting, right? The person's soul meets our Maker, and we have to give an accounting for how we lived our life. Understanding that there is accountability and that there is a God gives a person an understanding that everything that happens in our life is part of God's plan. And at this point, the relative would understand that what happened to his relative, the death of his relative, was also part of God's plan. And yes, it came about through the negligence of that person, and that person is responsible for the negligence. But the action itself that happened was supposed to happen, and this takes away the feeling of revenge. So let's bring it back to our life. Sometimes something happens in our life, and it can be through the hands of someone else. And there's two different things that we have to separate in our mind. There's number one, the accountability of the person. And yes, that person is accountable for what they did wrong. If they did wrong, they're accountable for it. But there's also the part of us, right? And that's separate. The part of our suffering is something that we can separate out, and we can realize that is divine, is from the divine. It doesn't mean it's a punishment, but it means it's part of a plan. And that understanding that it's part of a plan means that it's meaningful. And when a person understands that something's meaningful, even though it's painful, and even though we may not understand the meaning of it, it gives us a little bit of comfort, and it can take away that feeling of wanting to take revenge against the person who perpetrated the act. And that thought process, that feeling, can ultimately lead a person to peace, to come to a place where they have peace and peace of mind with what happened. They can come to a peace of mind that however painful, however hurtful it was, they can still make meaning from it. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear if this resonated with you. And if you'd like to discuss it further, you can get in touch with me. You can find me on Instagram at itsgilaross, or you can WhatsApp me. My number is in the show notes, and we can set up a time to discuss this further. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Have a wonderful day, and please take a moment to rate, review, subscribe, and share this podcast to anyone else who would benefit from it.